Hello, music lovers. My name is Carter. Welcome back to Quick Reviews, a series where I try and do quick reviews instead of my usual structure. I just speak to the things that I love about the album and give some insight to it. Today, the album that we're going to be talking about will be The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess by Chappell Roan. Quickly, before I get into the album will feature some talking about some adult topics, so if there are any kids watching, go ahead and give this video a skip. It's going to be not too descriptive, but I still do have to talk about some of the stuff just because of the contents of the album. So again, if you are a kid, just go ahead and give this album a skip. This video a skip. We have some great videos you can go watch instead. But The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess is the debut studio album from Chappell Roan. It is a pop album with implementations of like synth pop, pop rock, dance pop, and piano ballad pop. The album is produced by Dan Nigro, who is most primarily known for his working with Conan Gray and Olivia Rodrigo. Speaking of Olivia Rodrigo, some of the productional styles and other aspects of her music are similar to some of the tracks within this album, especially the track Phenomenon with the words on and on in the chorus, which really primarily remind me of the song Bad Idea Right, and really just reminds me of a lot of her work, which would make sense because, again, this album was produced by Dan Nigro, who produced Olivia's work. Before we really get into the heart of the music of the album, I want to speak to the rollout of this album, as well as the sort of beginning of Chappell Roan's career, because it is super important for understanding the album itself. The origin of Chappell Roan's professional music career began with her releasing a song called Die Young onto her YouTube channel. This track was discovered by someone who worked at or with Atlantic Records, which would lead to her signing a contract with them at only the age of 17. Roan then, with Atlantic Records, released her debut EP and eventually moved from her hometown in Missouri to Los Angeles to chase her musical dreams. At some point in LA, I'm believing this is where this happened, she met Dan Nigro, who had some work under his belt but really hadn't become the name that he is today. In 2018, her and Nigro began working on the songs that would later constitute the album. In April of 2020, Roan released her first single off the album, Pink Pony Club, which for a while Atlantic Records had been saying no towards releasing. At some point in 2020, she then went back to Missouri and then at some point ended up releasing this song called California, which was her second single. That was released in May 29th of 2020, and not too long after, in August of 2020, she was dropped by Atlantic Records for underperforming. Her LP and singles didn't do very well, at least for the standards of Atlantic Record and the notoriety and status that they have. Really, she was not matching up to that, and so she was dropped by Atlantic Records, and she then signed to Dan Nigro's Island Records, and then with Dan Nigro under Island Records, the album was fully developed and eventually released in September 2023. And upon the release of the album, it really didn't reach the success that it has now, which is very irregular. It wasn't until June 2024, over half a year later after the release, the album peaked at 10 on Billboard 200's top albums. This was because of three reasons. She performed at Coachella, she released a single called Good Luck Babe that did really well, and she was an opener for Olivia Rodrigo on her Guts World Tour. All of these three things really giving her some prominence now, where she is really close to becoming a top 100 artist on Spotify in the world. And so with that being said, up until her massive breakout this year, her career was a massive struggle, and the releasing of this album was a massive struggle and a disappointment to maybe the dreams that she had for moving to California to pursue a career. And so to get to the album, now that we have that part out of the way, let's get into really the contents of the album. Let's go ahead and start with Phenomenon, the opening track. This opening track documents Chappell Roan being in a straight relationship yet desiring a relationship with a female. The sound of this song is really interesting because it opens up with a sort of like classical instrumentation, and it's very angelic sounding, which is then followed by a very distorted sound in the pre-chorus and then a dance-heavy feeling in the chorus following Chappell saying, "Can you play a song with an effing beat?" This sound development, again, is really interesting because in the beginning she is talking about something more rooted within what most people would refer to as traditional or classical values, with the context of her referring to a heterosexual relationship. Although she's not really painting it in a great light, she is painting herself, as being a part of that relationship. And so the sound or the vibe of that part really imitates a classical style. Once the context of the song begins to refer to her desire for sexual relations and her indulgence within the pre-chorus, this song begins to have some distortion. It feels like we're sort of approaching something, and it feels like we're opening up to chaos and an escape from really normalcy or tradition, which lesbianism would be a break from what is often viewed as traditional values or the normalcy of the average person. And then when the chorus comes, she begins to basically beg for sex with a woman, which is accompanied with a dance-heavy sound, which really feels like an embracement and just a want to have fun. I'm not sure exactly if that is intended, but it most certainly has some form of effect upon the listener's understanding of those topics, or at least the way that Chappell is trying to explain them. Real quick, one more thing about the sound, which again might not be intentional, but the sound exudes this feeling of a rise with the happy classical sounding verse, which is then followed with the feeling of a fall with the distorted sound, which would sort of align with the title of the album. It sort of feels like a fall into lesbianism, not really in a negative manner, because she wouldn't portray it like that. That doesn't really fit within the album, as we're going to discuss throughout this video, but a fall in the manner of like really buying into something and really falling into the indulgence. Of course, this is more of a reference to something else that we'll talk about later, but these sexual topics can't really be separated from that topic, which we'll get into momentarily. Speaking of sexual topics, the central concept of the album surrounds Roan's journey into lesbianism. As previously discussed, the album opens with Chappell documenting her failed relationship with a man and her desire for a sexual relationship with a woman. This is done within the first track, as we discussed, Phenomenon, and then carries into the following tracks, Red Wine Supernova and After Midnight. These two songs really elaborate on her sexual desire and show the sort of strength and belief that she has, or the depths for her desires. These tracks are then followed by Casual and Coffee, both really being a reminder of where Chappell Roan is. This is really, we're separated a while from the reality of where she's at, but these songs sort of remind us that she is still in a straight relationship, even though she's having these desires, which maybe seem contrary to that. And in these songs, the men that she's with and sort of men together are described as being unable to give sexual pleasure and also being unable to commit to a relationship. And this sort of like brings about a boiling point, which comes about in the following track, Super Graphic Ultra Modern Girl, which represents a changing point where Chappell really just gives up on men and sort of falls into this desire for women. She's really engulfed by it. And so for the rest of the album, for the most part, it's just about her embracing lesbianism and queerness. This is done primarily through the songs Picture You, Pink Pony Club, Naked in Manhattan, and Guilty Pleasure. But interestingly, the album also features a subplot about Chappell Roan leaving the, conservative small town Midwest for the alluring career opportunities of Los Angeles, California. And as described earlier, her career up until really recently wasn't exactly the success story that maybe she was hoping for with moving to California. The dreams, especially of expensive clubbing or performing for large audiences, had not been fulfilled. LA and media is often seen as, and California is seen as a place of glamour and career opportunity, yet it wasn't exactly that for Chappell, and that was represented well within the song California. And within the song, she represents her old town as ugly and decaying, yet she views it as a place where she can be comfortable with it, because she's comfortable with the knowledge that it'll never be less than what she would expect. And so she knew her hometown in Missouri for what it was, but California, on the contrary, feels like a disappointment. And so whether intentional or not, this subplot about California can be intertwined with Chappell Roan's telling of her lesbian journey. This most notably is shown in the track Kaleidoscope, where Chappell Roan falls in love with a female friend, which ends up not working out. In the end, she is left with the same issues that she had with her previous guy relationships, where she really just could not create a stable relationship. And as she says about love within that track, how it works, I'll never know. And so there's this analogy that can be given to California, this place of desire and a fairly liberal place to lesbianism, and Missouri, this place where she can call home that's rather boring and lacks personality or ambition, and that can be compared to heterosexuality. And so for both her journey to California and her journey to becoming a lesbianism, the rise of the Midwest princess came with the initial ambition, yet the fall came with the disappointment. Although it could, on the contrary, be seen that the fall of the Midwest princess came with the death of her life in Missouri, given the title Midwest, I really am not sure, because there's kind of a vagueness about what Midwest princess really means, but undoubtedly her move to California and her journey to lesbianism was shown throughout this album to be in some ways a rise and a fall. Still though, even with what California and lesbianism showed for her, she still stuck with both. She still lives in California and she's still a lesbian. And this is reinforced with the track Guilty Pleasure, which is about sexual pleasure with women, which by its name, assigns some form of guilt that she has surrounding that indulgence, yet it does describe it as a pleasure. To get into the music of the album, I thought the album overall was very unison or homogeneous. Despite the different styles, none of them really stood out of place. For examples of some of these styles, Femininomenon was a great take on dance pop with great rock infusements. Red Wine Supernova was a great pop song which was very bubblegum pop, sort of like Sabrina Carpenter-esque. It's very upbeat and also had an element of relaxation with the acoustic accompaniment. Super Graphic Ultra Modern Girl has a sort of EDM style which, despite maybe being the most flawed track on the album, it still finds a way to fit within the overall sound. Hot to Go infuses cheerleading chants with music, and these are like so many different styles, but again, none of them really stood out of place. Another point to be made is that this album really lacked a terrible song, but also there's not really a song that's exactly a masterpiece. There are a few tracks that could have demanded more energy, or the album could have demanded more dynamics, but overall the album is really well put together. This album not only features a lot of upbeat pop, but a lot of intimate songs. Unfortunately, a lot of these intimate songs don't really possess the most meaningful lyrics, but still, the album is still really well put together and the emotions still find their way. Overall, I really enjoyed my experience with the album listening to it and was very impressed with some of the music and the overall albumic experience. I'm thinking the album is between an 8.5 and 8.75. I'll give it an 8.75 out of 10. A quick note about the album, most of, if not all, album has some form of political or social leaning to it, because it's about something that has some form of social or political philosophical meaning to it. But there's a lot of music that is, when it's made for primarily the purposes of pushing a cause rather than just someone evaluating their thoughts, it's really like made for a cause. It has this utter cringiness, and a lot of times like political music, if you want to call it that, really lacks a lot of objective looking, and it lacks some authenticity for it. But with the inclusion of songs such as Kaleidoscope, the album talks about political topics and social topics without coming across as cringy or too on the nose or coming across as lacking authenticity, which is something that I really enjoy about the album. She could have just made everything sunshine and rainbows and just made it this queer anthem where it's about just everyone should become queer, but that's really not what it's about. With that being said, that'll conclude my album review. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more uploads. I'll be uploading very soon, hopefully. And while you're at it, if you want to, go ahead and leave a comment. Just let me know if there's anything you'd like to see me improve, or go ahead and tell me your thoughts on the album. I'd love to hear what you have to say. But with that being said, as always, God bless. Goodbye. Have a good day. Bye-bye.